She had always been quiet, the kind of girl who stayed in the back of the classroom and spoke only when asked. While other kids ran around during lunch break, she preferred to sit alone near the school hall where an old dusty piano stood. Most students barely noticed it anymore, but she did. Every time she passed by, she felt something stir inside her. The sound of the few working keys had a strange pull, almost like the piano was calling to her. The school piano wasn't in good shape. Some keys were broken, others stuck halfway, and it was out of tune most of the time. Still, she loved it. She would run her fingers gently across the keys and press one or two, listening to the uneven notes echo around the hall. It wasn't much, but to her it was magic. She had never learned music before. Her family didn't have the money for instruments or lessons. Her father worked long hours at a small repair shop, and her mother spent most of her day sewing clothes for neighbors. They didn't complain, but there was never extra money for hobbies or dreams. So she kept her growing love for the piano mostly to herself. Her classmates didn't make it easy either. Whenever she stayed behind after school, they teased her. "You think you're some kind of musician?" They'd laugh. "You can't even play." Sometimes she would pretend she didn't hear them, but their words stuck like splinters in her heart. Still, she kept returning to the piano after everyone left, dusting the keys before playing the few notes she knew. At home, there was no piano, no keyboard, not even a toy version. But she didn't let that stop her. One day, she cut out long pieces of cardboard, drew black and white rectangles on it, and taped it to her table. That became her practice piano. Every evening after finishing her homework, she would sit in front of it and move her fingers as if real sounds were coming out. She practiced finger movements, rhythm, and memory. Her parents thought it was a little odd at first, but said nothing. They knew it made her happy. When her mother noticed how serious she was becoming, she said one night, "It's good that you're learning something, but you must not forget your studies." "I won't," she replied softly, "but one day I'll learn to play for real." Her mother smiled weakly, half believing her and half worrying. Dreams were beautiful, but in their world, dreams didn't always fit into daily life. At school, she often stayed behind after classes, waiting until everyone left so she could use the piano without anyone watching. She had found a few online videos about piano basics and tried to copy what she saw. It was difficult. The videos moved too fast. Her internet connection was weak and her piano didn't sound like theirs. But she didn't give up. Every day she learned something new. How to position her hands, how to count beats, how to play a simple melody. The janitor often complained that she was still there when he wanted to lock up. Sometimes she had to beg him for just 5 more minutes. Her friends didn't understand. They preferred spending time on their phones, watching shows or hanging out after school. When she said she couldn't join because she was practicing, they laughed. "Practicing what? That broken piano?" one of them said. "You can't even make it sound nice." The laughter hurt more than she wanted to admit. Sometimes she wondered if they were right. Maybe she was wasting her time. But then she would sit in front of her cardboard piano again and imagine playing for a crowd. She could see it clearly. The lights, the quiet audience, the sound of her fingers dancing across the keys. The thought made her heart beat faster. It gave her strength to keep going. One afternoon, the music teacher, who rarely visited that part of the building, heard someone playing. The notes were uneven but full of feeling. When he peeked in, he saw her sitting alone, eyes closed, completely lost in the music. He watched quietly for a minute before speaking. "You like the piano, don't you?" he asked. She jumped in surprise. "Oh, I didn't hear you come in," she said quickly. The teacher smiled. "That's a good sign. It means you're focused." "I'm just learning a little," she said, embarrassed. He looked at the old piano and shook his head. "That thing's been sitting here for years. I'm surprised anyone can make a tune out of it." She smiled shyly. "It's not so bad." "Well," he said, "keep at it. Passion matters more than perfect sound." Those few words filled her with new energy. She practiced harder after that. Even when her fingers got sore, she kept playing. Even when the janitor turned off the lights, she stayed for a few more minutes playing in the dark, feeling the keys under her hands. One day, she heard about a small local event where students could perform any talent they had: singing, dancing, poetry, or playing instruments. Her heart leapt. Maybe this was her chance. But then fear set in. What if she messed up? What if they laughed again? Still, something inside her said she should try. She filled out the form quietly and didn't tell anyone, not even her parents, until the day of the event. When her name was called, her hands were shaking. She walked slowly to the stage, where a small piano waited under bright lights. The crowd seemed huge. She could hear whispers, giggles, and the rustling of chairs. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely think. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, everything felt right. Then she hit a wrong note. A few people in the audience chuckled. She tried again, but her nerves got the better of her. Her hands trembled and the melody fell apart. Someone whispered, "I told you she can't play." Tears filled her eyes, but she kept going even though every note felt heavier. When she finally finished, there was a short, awkward silence before the next performer was called. She walked off the stage as fast as she could, her chest tight with shame. Backstage, she sat alone, staring at her hands. Maybe I was wrong, she thought. Maybe this isn't for me. She wanted to disappear. The laughter from the crowd replayed in her mind again and again. When she got home, her mother could tell something was wrong. "How did it go?" she asked gently. She shook her head, unable to speak. Her mother sat beside her and took her hand. "Did something happen?" "I played bad," she whispered. They laughed. Her mother sighed softly. People laugh because they don't understand. But you understand what you love, right? She nodded weakly. "Then don't stop. Even the best start off sounding wrong," her mother said. Those words stayed with her. That night she couldn't sleep. She thought about quitting, but something inside refused to let her. She had come too far to give up now. She promised herself that she would try again, no matter how long it took. The next day, she went back to the school hall. The piano sat there, dusty as always, but now it looked like a friend who was waiting for her. She sat down, wiped her tears, and started playing again. The sound was rough at first, but she didn't stop. Every wrong note was just another step toward getting better. Weeks passed, and she practiced harder than ever. Sometimes her classmates still made fun of her, but she didn't listen anymore. When she played, it felt like the world disappeared, and there was only the music and her heart beating with it. Her teacher noticed her persistence and gave her a few old sheets of music. "Try these," he said. "They're not easy, but I think you're ready." She smiled and took them home carefully, studying every note as if it were a treasure. She didn't understand everything at first, but she kept trying. Slowly, the notes started to make sense. Her fingers began to move more confidently. One afternoon, as she was practicing alone, she realized something had changed. The sound coming from the piano wasn't broken anymore, it was alive. The same piano that once sounded dull now carried her feelings in every note. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. She looked around the empty hall and smiled. For the first time, she felt proud. No audience, no applause, just her and the music. She remembered the laughter, the mistakes, the tears, and how each one had pushed her to this moment. That evening, when she returned home, her mother asked, "How was your practice today?" She smiled. It was good, really good. Her mother nodded and went back to sewing, but she could see the light in her daughter's eyes. It was the same kind of light that comes when someone starts to believe in themselves again. She knew this was only the beginning. Someday people would listen and not laugh. They would see what she saw all along, that dreams don't shine overnight, but with patience and courage, even the smallest light can grow bright enough to be seen. And as she drifted off to sleep that night, she could almost hear it, the soft, warm sound of a piano playing in her dreams, carrying her forward to whatever waited next. The days after her failed performance were hard, but she didn't give up. Every time she looked at the piano, she remembered how it felt to be laughed at, yet instead of running from that feeling, she used it to push herself. She wanted to make those same people listen, really listen one day. After school, she still went to the hall to practice. The janitor had started recognizing her now. Sometimes he would just shake his head and mutter, "You again?" But there was a hint of a smile in his voice. She always thanked him politely, promising she wouldn't stay long, though she almost always did. The piano sounded worse than ever some days. A few keys were sticking again, and the sound would echo strangely through the empty room. Still she played. Even when her fingers hurt or when she couldn't get the rhythm right, she refused to stop. Sometimes, when she made too many mistakes, she would lean her head against the piano and whisper softly, "I'll get it right tomorrow." And somehow, that promise kept her going. At home, her routine was simple. School homework, chores, then practice. First on the cardboard keyboard she'd made, then the real piano at school when she could sneak in. Her parents didn't say much about it anymore. Her father often came home tired, covered in dust from his work, and her mother was always busy with sewing orders. Still, whenever they saw her practicing quietly in the corner, they exchanged small smiles. They didn't understand music much, but they understood dedication. Weeks passed, and slowly something began to change. Her fingers were moving faster. Her timing was improving, and for the first time the notes she played started sounding like songs. Simple songs, yes, but songs that made sense. One afternoon, a group of students passed by the hall while she was playing. Usually she would stop and pretend to pack up, but that day she kept going. She didn't look at them. She didn't care. When they didn't hear her stop, they paused for a moment and listened. After a few seconds, one of them said, "Hey, that actually sounds good." She didn't react, but inside something lifted. It wasn't applause, but it was better. It was recognition. Still, not everyone was kind. Some students still teased her, saying she was trying too hard or that no one cares about piano anymore. Sometimes she laughed it off, but other times it hurt. When it did, she played even harder. The piano became her way to talk when words wouldn't come out right. Her music teacher started noticing her too. One afternoon, as she finished a tune, he walked in and clapped softly. "You've been improving," he said. "I didn't expect to see you here so often." She smiled shyly. "I just like playing." "That's good," he said. "But liking it is only the start. You need someone to guide you properly." She nodded, even though she knew lessons were out of reach. Still, his words gave her hope that maybe one day she could find a teacher who would help her. Around that time, she learned about a regional competition that allowed students from different schools to perform. The thought of performing again scared her, but it also excited her. She remembered her promise to herself, to turn mockery into music. This could be her chance. She went to the school notice board and copied down the details. The sign-up fee was small, but still more than she could easily afford. That night, she sat at the dinner table quietly, thinking about whether to ask her parents. She didn't want to burden them. Her father noticed her silence. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She hesitated. "There's a music competition, but it's okay. I don't think I can join. Why not?" Her mother asked. "There's a small fee," she said softly, "and I might not be good enough yet." Her father looked at her for a moment, then reached into his pocket and placed a few crumpled bills on the table. "If you want to try, try," he said. "Even if you lose, you'll learn." Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "You've worked hard. That's worth supporting." That night she registered for the competition. Her hands shook as she filled out the form, but her heart felt light. This time, she promised herself, things would be different. The next few weeks were intense. She practiced every single day, perfecting one piece, a gentle melody she had found in an old music book. It wasn't a famous song, but it spoke to her. The tune felt like her own story, soft in the beginning, full of struggle in the middle, and hopeful at the end. Sometimes she stayed so long at school that the janitor would have to flicker the lights to remind her it was time to go. Other times she practiced in silence at home, using her cardboard keys, imagining the sound in her head. It wasn't easy. Some nights her hands trembled from tiredness, and her eyes burned from studying the notes. But she refused to give up. One evening, while she was practicing alone, she didn't notice someone standing by the door. It was an elderly man with gray hair and kind eyes, leaning quietly against the wall, listening. When she finished, he clapped gently. Startled, she turned around. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't know anyone was here." He smiled. "You play with heart," he said. "That's rare." She didn't know what to say. "I used to teach piano here years ago," he continued. "I come by sometimes just to see if the school still remembers music." "Looks like it does." Her face lit up. "You're a music teacher?" "Retired," he said. "But I can still tell when someone loves the piano." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Would you maybe teach me a little?" "I can't pay, but I'll work hard." The man looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you," he said. "But you must promise something." "What?" "That you won't give up when it gets difficult." "I promise," she said immediately. And so, a new chapter began. The retired teacher met her 3 evenings a week in the school hall. He brought with him an old folder full of handwritten notes and yellowed sheet music. He was strict but kind, patient yet demanding. Music is not about showing off, he often said. It's about telling a story. Every key is a word, every sound is a feeling. Under his guidance, she began to understand music differently. He corrected her posture, her hand movements, and her rhythm. He made her practice scales for hours, which she found boring at first, but then he explained, "Scales are like learning the alphabet before you write poetry." Slowly, her music became clearer, more confident. The notes no longer stumbled, they spoke. The teacher often closed his eyes while she played, nodding along softly. "You see?" he would say. "The piano isn't just an instrument. It listens to you. It breathes with you." She listened carefully to everything he said. Sometimes, after a difficult session, she would feel frustrated. "I keep getting it wrong," she'd say. He would chuckle. "Good, that means you're learning. Mistakes are the proof that you're trying." The days turned into weeks, and soon the competition was only a few days away. She practiced every moment she could. Her parents noticed the glow on her face again, the same one they had seen when she first discovered the piano. Even though they didn't understand the details of her music, they understood her passion. The night before the competition, she barely slept. She lay in bed thinking about everything: the laughter from her first performance, the cardboard keyboard, the teacher who helped her parents' support. All of it led to this moment. The next morning, she woke up early, dressed neatly, and tied her hair back. Her mother handed her a small lunch and whispered, "Just play like you do when no one's watching." Her father smiled and said, "Whatever happens, we're proud of you." At school, her retired teacher was waiting near the gate. He gave her a small nod and said, "Remember what I told you. Play what you feel, not what you fear." She smiled nervously. "I'll try." As she walked toward the stage, she could feel her heart racing. The hall was filled with people: students, teachers, parents, and judges. The piano stood under a single spotlight, shining faintly. Her name was called. She took a deep breath, walked onto the stage, and sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For a moment, the noise in the hall disappeared. It was just her, the piano, and silence waiting to be filled. She closed her eyes, remembering the nights of practice, the mistakes, the cardboard piano, and her mother's words. Then she began to play. As she began to play, her hands trembled slightly, but once her fingers touched the keys, the world outside disappeared. Each note echoed softly through the hall, filling the air with something gentle and alive. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat, calm yet full of emotion. People who had been whispering just moments before grew quiet, watching her in silence. She didn't look up once. Her eyes stayed closed as she played from memory, every sound guiding her forward. The first few seconds were shaky, but then her rhythm settled. The nervousness slowly turned into focus, and soon she forgot where she was. She wasn't playing for judges or an audience anymore. She was playing for herself, for every night she had practiced alone, every tear, every small victory no one else had seen. When the final note lingered in the air, there was stillness. Then a soft wave of applause began, growing louder and stronger. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. It came from people who had felt something genuine in her performance. She stood up, her heart racing, and bowed slightly before walking off stage. The retired teacher, who had been watching from the front row, gave her a proud nod. "Well done," he whispered when she walked past him. "You played with soul." Backstage, she sat quietly, still catching her breath. She didn't care if she won or lost. For the first time, she felt proud, not because others clapped, but because she had played the way she always dreamed of playing. Later that afternoon, when the winners were announced, her name wasn't called for first place. She didn't win, but she received a special recognition for expression, which to her felt like a victory. She smiled when they handed her the small certificate. To her, it wasn't paper. It was proof that her effort had finally meant something. Her parents waited for her outside the hall. When she showed them the certificate, her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I told you," she said softly. "One day people would listen." Her father smiled, resting his hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning." The retired teacher stood nearby, smiling quietly. "You have something rare," he told her. "Don't stop now. You're only starting to understand what music can do." That evening, when she sat at home holding the certificate, she thought about his words. For years she had played because she wanted to prove something, to the ones who laughed, to the ones who doubted her. But now she realized she was doing it for herself. Playing made her feel free, alive and whole. From that day on, her lessons with the retired teacher continued. They didn't just focus on songs anymore. He began to teach her how to listen, to the pauses between notes, to the silence that carried emotion. Anyone can hit the right key, he said, but only those who feel can make the piano speak. She started learning how to read sheet music properly, and even tried creating small pieces of her own. Her first few attempts sounded clumsy, but her teacher encouraged her to keep trying. Every composer begins with mistakes, he said. The important thing is to let your heart lead your hands. Her confidence began to grow. Each time she played, her sound became clearer and more expressive. She could now play pieces she had once thought were impossible. The same students who used to mock her started sitting near the hall just to listen. At first, they pretended it was by accident, but soon, they began asking her to play specific tunes. Some even apologized for the way they had treated her before. One of them said shyly, "I didn't know you could play like that." "It's really nice," she smiled politely. "It took a lot of practice," she replied, her voice calm and kind. She had learned something important. Not everyone who laughs means harm, and not everyone who praises means support. What mattered was to keep doing what she loved, no matter who watched. Her teacher often spoke about how music connected people. "A good musician doesn't just play," he said. "They make others feel what they feel. When you share your music, you share a part of yourself." She thought about that often. It made her realize how deeply music had changed her. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about expressing what words couldn't say. The loneliness she had felt, the courage she had built, the quiet joy that came from small progress. As months went by, the school started preparing for a big annual event where the best students showcased their talents. Her teacher insisted she should perform again. She hesitated at first, remembering how her last public performance had gone. But he said gently, "This time, you'll play differently, not with fear, but with truth." So, she agreed. The weeks leading up to the event were full of preparation. She practiced every morning before school and every evening afterward. Her teacher worked closely with her, helping her refine every detail. The way she touched the keys, the way she breathed between phrases, even the way she sat. "Your posture tells the audience how you feel," he said. "Confidence begins before the first note." Her parents noticed her hard work and quietly supported her however they could. Her father fixed the broken leg of her practice stool, and her mother mended her performance dress so she could wear it again. They didn't have much, but they gave everything they could. The night before the event, she sat at her desk looking at her old cardboard piano, which she still kept. It reminded her of where it all began, the little girl who couldn't afford an instrument but dreamed of playing one anyway. She smiled softly. "You got me this far," she whispered. The next day, the school auditorium was packed. Students, teachers, and parents filled the seats. The stage lights were bright and the piano stood at the center, polished and shining. Her teacher was in the audience, sitting quietly, giving her a reassuring nod when she looked his way. She took a deep breath and walked up to the stage. The sound of her footsteps echoed across the floor. The audience murmured softly, recognizing her. Some remembered her from the first time she had performed, the girl who had once run off the stage in tears. Now she looked calm. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a brief second, everything went silent. Then she began. The music that filled the hall was soft at first, delicate like morning light. Then it grew, layer by layer, into something full and rich. Every note carried emotion, hope, sadness, strength, peace. Her playing told a story, though no words were spoken. It was the story of a girl who once believed she wasn't enough, who was laughed at, who almost gave up but didn't. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn to the honesty of her sound. The same classmates who once mocked her now sat still, watching her with awe. Even teachers who had barely noticed her before exchanged quiet glances of surprise. Her music had changed the room. When the final note faded, there was silence. Then applause, strong and heartfelt. She stood up slowly, her heart pounding, and bowed. The clapping grew louder, echoing through the hall like thunder. She saw her teacher smiling proudly, his eyes shining. Her parents were standing too, clapping harder than anyone. After the event, many people came to congratulate her. Some asked how long she had been playing. Others wanted to know who her teacher was. But what touched her most was when a younger student approached shyly and said, "You made me want to learn the piano, too." She bent down slightly and smiled. "Start with what you have," she said softly. "Even if it's just your fingers on a table. Don't stop." That night, when she returned home, her teacher called to tell her how proud he was. "You didn't just play a song today," he said. "You shared your story. That's what real music is." After hanging up, she sat quietly in her room, still hearing the echoes of the applause. But instead of feeling proud in a loud way, she felt calm. Her heart was peaceful. She looked at her hands and smiled. They were no longer the trembling hands of a scared girl. They were the hands of someone who had found her purpose. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about how far she had come. She knew there would still be challenges, mistakes, and days when she'd doubt herself again. But now she understood something powerful. Every wrong note was just part of learning the right song, and deep down, she knew she was only at the beginning of her journey. The world was bigger than her small school hall, and one day, her music would travel beyond it, carrying with it every feeling, every struggle, every dream that had kept her going. The weeks after the school event felt like a dream. Everywhere she went, people recognized her as the girl who played the piano so beautifully. Teachers who had never spoken much to her now smiled when they passed. Students who used to laugh at her now stopped to ask how long she had been practicing or if she could teach them something. But even with all that attention, she didn't let it change her. She was still the same quiet, humble girl who preferred the company of her piano to crowded conversations. Her teacher often reminded her, fame, even small fame, fades quickly. But passion lasts. Keep your focus on the music, not on the noise around it. She took those words seriously. Every evening, she returned to the same hall, the same piano, and practiced for hours. Some days were full of joy, and other days frustration took over. There were moments when she couldn't get a piece right, no matter how many times she tried. Her teacher would listen patiently, then say, "Even when the notes don't work, your heart still does. Listen to it." One afternoon, as she practiced, her teacher brought her a small envelope. "There's something I think you should try," he said. Inside was a flyer for a regional music festival. It was much bigger than the school event. There would be judges from different cities, musicians from all over, and even media coverage. Her hands trembled as she held the flyer. "This looks serious," she said. "It is," her teacher replied. "And I think you're ready." She hesitated. "What if I'm not good enough for something like this?" He smiled gently. "You'll never know unless you try. And remember, you don't play to impress, you play to express." That night, she sat on her bed staring at the flyer. The idea of playing in front of a large audience both thrilled and scared her. She knew it would be nothing like the school hall. There would be bright lights, cameras, and professional judges watching every move she made. But somewhere deep inside, she also knew she had to do it. She had worked too hard to stay hidden forever. The next day, she told her parents about the festival. They listened quietly, then looked at each other. Her mother was the first to speak. "It will cost something to travel and register," she said softly. Her father nodded slowly. "But she's earned this chance. We'll find a way." Her teacher helped her with the registration, and soon she was officially signed up. The festival was only 2 months away. From that day on, her life revolved around preparing for it. Her teacher helped her choose a piece that would show both her emotion and skill. It wasn't an easy one. The melody started gently but grew into a powerful flow that demanded both strength and grace. "This will challenge you," he warned. "But it's the perfect story for you to tell." Every day she practiced until her fingers felt numb. Sometimes her hands shook from exhaustion, but she refused to stop. The sound of the piano filled the empty hall every evening. She played until she could hear every note in her sleep. Her teacher would sit beside her, listening carefully, correcting small mistakes, and guiding her gently. "The audience won't just hear your music," he told her. "They'll hear your story. You've lived through those notes. Let them feel that." As the festival drew closer, her nerves grew stronger. Some nights she would lie awake, imagining all the things that could go wrong. What if she forgot the notes? What if the piano keys felt strange under her hands? What if she froze? But then she would remember all those times she had played when no one believed in her. All the lonely evenings with her cardboard keyboard and how she never gave up. One morning, as she sat on the bench before starting her practice. Her teacher looked at her and said, "You know, when I was young, I wanted to play in this same festival. I never got the chance. Life took me in another direction, but seeing you now feels like seeing that dream again." She looked at him surprised. "Then this isn't just my dream," she said softly. "It's ours." He smiled, and for the first time she saw tears in his eyes. The day of the festival came faster than she expected. Her parents traveled with her, and her teacher came too. The venue was huge, a real concert hall with hundreds of seats and a grand piano that shone under golden lights. Just walking onto that stage for the rehearsal made her knees weak. All around her were musicians tuning instruments, checking notes, and warming up their fingers. Some looked confident, others nervous. She felt small among them, but her teacher whispered, "You belong here. Don't forget that." When her turn finally came in the evening, she could hear her heartbeat louder than the applause for the previous performer. As she walked onto the stage, the lights felt blinding. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and looked at the piano in front of her. It was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen. The room went quiet. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. Her hands trembled, but she closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. In that silence, she remembered her mother's voice. "Just play like you do when no one's watching." Then she began. The first few notes came out softly, almost fragile, like a whisper. Then they grew steadier, stronger, full of feeling. The sound spread through the hall, reaching every corner. It was as if each key carried a piece of her story. The laughter she had faced, the tears she had shed, the nights she had practiced alone. People in the audience leaned forward, completely drawn in. Even the judges stopped writing for a moment, listening closely. Her teacher sat in the front row, his hands folded, eyes glistening. Halfway through the piece, one of the pedals squeaked slightly, and for a moment, panic rose in her chest. But instead of letting it break her focus, she turned that small mistake into part of the rhythm. She had learned long ago that perfection wasn't the goal, emotion was. As the final part of the melody approached, her fingers moved faster, smoother, and stronger. The hall seemed to breathe with her. When the last note finally echoed and faded into silence, she sat there for a few seconds, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart racing. Then came the applause. Loud, warm, and endless. She stood up, dazed. For a moment she couldn't even smile, she was too overwhelmed. Then she looked toward her teacher, who was standing, clapping proudly. Her parents were standing too, their faces shining with tears. That moment felt like everything she had ever dreamed of. After the performance, people came up to her congratulating her, asking about her story, her training, and her teacher. The judges praised her emotional depth and control, saying that her playing came from the heart. When the results were announced later that night, she didn't win first place, but she did win the Audience Choice Award, voted by everyone who had listened. For her, that was even more meaningful. It wasn't about trophies, it was about connection. As they left the hall that night, her teacher said, "Do you see? They didn't just hear your music. They heard you. That's the power of honesty." She smiled through her tears. "Thank you for believing in me," she whispered. He shook his head. "You did all of this yourself. I just reminded you where the keys were." The next morning when she woke up, she couldn't stop smiling. The applause still echoed in her mind. But more than that, she felt peace. It wasn't pride, it was gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the people who helped her, and for every failure that had taught her to rise again. She knew her journey wasn't over. The world was wide, and she wanted to share her music beyond small towns and school halls. She wanted to study more, learn from great musicians, and someday teach others the way her mentor had taught her. As she looked out the window that morning, sunlight spilling into her room, she whispered softly, "This is just the beginning." And somewhere in that quiet moment, she could almost hear a familiar voice, her teacher's calm, steady tone saying, "Play what you feel, not what they expect." She smiled, her heart full of warmth, because she finally understood. She hadn't just learned to play the piano, she had learned to turn pain into beauty and silence into song. The morning after the festival, she woke up early. The city was still quiet, and soft sunlight slipped through the curtains. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. The same hands that had once trembled over broken keys were now the same hands that had made a hall full of strangers applaud. Her teacher and parents were still asleep, but she couldn't stop replaying the night in her head. The stage lights, the silence before she played, and then that wave of applause that had felt like a dream. She smiled, thinking about how far she had come. When they reached home later that day, her neighbors greeted her with cheers. They had seen her photo in the local paper. The headline read, "Local girl wins hearts with her piano performance." She blushed when she saw it. It felt unreal. Her parents couldn't stop smiling either. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "See? I told you the world would hear you someday." Her father, who wasn't usually very expressive, just nodded and said, "You made us proud." But deep inside, she didn't feel proud. She felt grateful. Grateful for every struggle that had brought her here, and for the people who had stood by her when no one else did. Her teacher visited her a few days later. He brought a small box tied with a ribbon. "For you," he said softly. Inside was a silver pendant shaped like a tiny piano key. On the back, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "Play your truth." She smiled and felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful," she said. He nodded. "Just a reminder. Every time you play, remember who you are, not who people expect you to be." She wore that pendant every day after that. As weeks passed, her video from the festival started to spread online. People from other towns began sending messages saying how her music had touched them. Some said her performance made them cry. Others said it inspired them to start learning music again. She couldn't believe that her small dream was reaching so many hearts. She didn't chase fame, yet it was slowly finding her. One afternoon, her teacher told her about an opportunity. "There's a youth concert being organized in the city next month," he said. "They're looking for young pianists. Would you like to audition?" Her eyes widened. "Me?" she asked in disbelief. He smiled. "Why not you?" At first she hesitated. The thought of performing again in front of a bigger audience made her nervous. But then she thought of all those nights she had practiced when no one believed in her. She knew she couldn't let fear stop her now. She agreed. The following weeks were full of practice once again. The new piece she chose was softer than the last one, almost like a conversation between her and the piano. It was emotional and gentle, and every time she played it, it felt like telling her life story all over again, without words. Her teacher guided her patiently, reminding her to play with honesty, not perfection. "You already have what can't be taught," he told her one day. "You feel the music. That's rare." When the day of the city audition came, she was more composed than before. She still felt nervous, but this time it wasn't fear. It was excitement. She knew that no matter what happened, she had already proven something to herself. She walked onto the stage, greeted the judges politely, and sat down. The piano gleamed under the lights, and as her fingers touched the keys, everything else faded. There was no crowd, no pressure, just her and the sound she loved. When she finished, the judges nodded approvingly. One of them said, "You have a gift. Keep nurturing it." She smiled, thanked them, and left the stage feeling lighter than ever. A few days later, she got the call. She was selected. Her parents were overjoyed, and her teacher smiled proudly. "This is your next chapter," he said. The youth concert was a much bigger event with television coverage and professional musicians. She felt nervous again, but also determined. Each step of her journey had taught her something new: how to face failure, how to rise, and how to keep moving forward. On the evening of the concert, she stood backstage listening to the sound of applause for the performer before her. She took a deep breath and touched the small piano pendant around her neck. It reminded her of everything she had gone through: the laughter, the doubt, the long nights, the silent prayers. When her turn came, she walked out calmly. The stage looked grand, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. She sat down, closed her eyes for a brief second, and began to play. The melody filled the hall, gentle yet strong, like a voice telling a story of hope. The notes rose and fell softly as if the piano itself was breathing. The audience watched quietly, some even closing their eyes to feel it. Halfway through the piece, she thought of her younger self, the girl sitting alone in a school hall, pretending to play on cardboard keys, dreaming of this very moment. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but she didn't stop. She kept playing, letting every emotion flow through her fingertips. When the last note faded, the hall stayed silent for a moment. Then came the sound she would never forget: thunderous applause, louder than ever before. People stood up, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name. She smiled through her tears, bowing deeply before leaving the stage. Backstage, her teacher hugged her. "You didn't just play," he said softly. "You moved them." Later that night, after all the congratulations and handshakes, she sat alone by the window of her hotel room, looking at the city lights. She felt peaceful. She didn't care about trophies or attention. What mattered was that her music had reached people's hearts. She thought about her old piano at school, the one she used to sneak into the hall to play. It wasn't in great condition, but it had been her greatest companion. She decided then that she wanted to do something for the place where her dream had started. A few months later, she returned to her school with a surprise. With the money she had earned from small performances, she bought a brand new piano for the music room. When the school principal saw it, she was speechless. "This is your gift to the next dreamer," her teacher said proudly. She smiled. "I hope it helps someone else believe in themselves just like I did." That day, she sat down at the new piano and played for the students who had gathered around. Many of them were hearing her play live for the first time. The sound filled the hall, warm and clear. Some of the kids looked amazed. Others looked inspired. When she finished, they clapped and cheered just like the audience at her first big performance. But this applause felt different. It was full of innocence and hope. She looked at the faces around her and saw her old self in some of them. The same spark. The same quiet dreams waiting to be heard. As she stood up, one little girl came forward and asked shyly, "Can I learn to play like you someday?" She smiled gently. "You already can. You just have to believe in your sound." The little girl grinned and nodded. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, she sat alone in the hall again. The same hall where it had all begun. The sunlight was fading through the windows, and the quiet hum of the old building filled the air. She placed her hands on the keys and played softly, smiling to herself. This time she didn't play for anyone else. She played for that young girl who had once been mocked, who had once cried after failing, but who never stopped believing in the power of her own melody. Her teacher stood silently at the doorway watching her. He didn't say anything, he didn't need to. The music said it all. When she finished, she looked up and saw him smiling. "You've come full circle," he said. She nodded, feeling her eyes fill with tears. "I think I finally understand," she whispered. He tilted his head. "Understand what?" "That the applause was never the goal," she said softly. "It was always about the music." He smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And that's why your music will always be remembered." She looked at the piano once more, took a deep breath, and whispered a quiet thank you to the journey, to her teacher, to every moment that had shaped her. Then she walked out of the hall, the evening light following her, her heart calm and full. She didn't know where life would take her next, but one thing was clear. The world would always remember the girl whose piano once turned mockery into applause.